Crossed-beam over-the-horizon radars, such as the giant Soviet woodpecker transmitters, are ideal for use as carriers or wires for distant, time-reversed wave interferometry. A return time-reversed signal of extreme power can be delivered directly to that target. Almost all of the transmitted time-reversed wave energy will arrive at and in that distant target, even through a highly nonlinear medium or under scattering conditions. Hardly any of the energy will be lost en route. If the target is fast-moving, a lead correction signal can be calculated and added to steer the return path. Second, real-time holography can readily be accomplished using time-reversed waves and without first making holograms. In addition, by using pumped four-wave mixing, as much energy as one desires can be placed into the distant hologram, including even negative energy, which cancels an equal amount of positive energy. Powerful geometrical forms, balls, shapes, hemispherical shells, and so forth, of electromagnetic energy can be created at a distance quite readily by interferometry or crossed beam techniques using time-reversed waves. Since the TR wave carriers do not disperse with distance, these interference energy forms can be assembled by crossing TR wave beams at great distances, even at thousands of miles. Now, beginning in July 1976, powerful new Soviet over-the-horizon radars, the infamous woodpeckers, became operational. Extensive weather engineering over the U.S. has been accomplished by these weapon systems. Now, this has been separately documented by the present author, by C.B. Baker, editor of Youth Action News, Andrew Mikrowski of Canada's Planetary Association for Clean Energy, and other researchers such as Andrea Puharich.
And I have no interest in the Nazis, frankly, except as a historical aberration of the human spirit, where, you know, some group thinks they really are superior and have to prove it by clobbering everybody who is not superior and slaughtering some 40 million people in the process. So I would say that the only reason that I take any interest in this is like studying pathology, you know, getting into the diseases of mankind, and it's kind of sickening process. But the only reason I pursue it is that I'm sorry to say that the neo-Nazis are very much alive and well, and I've run into them. As a matter of fact, their headquarters are in England, and they're financed, believe it or not, by a huge trust left by the Shah of Iran's family. And in England it has one name, and it's not in Iran anymore because that was taken over by the revolutionary Iranians. But they are very much alive and well, and their current program, the reason I know this is to know where I get my facts from, is for some reason or other, even though I'm of Slavic origin, the Germans think I'm hot stuff in this area of the occult and all this stuff, and they've wooed me for years, but in very subtle ways. And they wanted me to be the research director of their foundation in England, which the parent foundation set up by actually the Shah of Iran's mother. It's called the Darius Foundation, from the great Persian leader Darius. And the one in England was called Threshold Foundation. They've changed the name of that, and they've, when they were kind of not exposed but discovered for what they were doing. And there was a Prince Shahram, who is a nephew of the late Shah of Iran, who runs the English thing. And so I got this, I let him wine and dine me until I could ascertain exactly what they were up to and their Nazi connections and so on and so on. And what I found out was the following, that they still want to take over the world, but they figure it's costly to do it with military operations. And the way to do it is to, you all know about the planetary grid. It's It's a structure, kind of a geodesic structure of the planet in which there are certain power centers, and they all form a very elaborate link. You can read about it in the magazine called Pursuit. They've run about 3 stories on it in the last 2 years. Anyway, this planetary grid, if you are on a power center, and there are several hundred of these power centers, you can then use occult influence, which means you use somebody who's a very powerful sender of thoughts and energy, and from that point you radiate out your thoughts, and influence people without their knowing they're being influenced. So this is the current program of the neo-Nazis to take over the world. And what they do is, if the power center they locate, according to their own grid, is on land, they will try to find exactly where it is, actually go out and do the survey, and then they buy that land, and they put one of their people on there who is a very highly trained psychic. And they're buying up property all over the planet this way, and I knew the guy in England who was in charge of that particular operation. And this is what drove all the scientists nuts in 1976 when the Russians first came on the air with the ELF signals being sent out from Russia. What drove them crazy was, here's a wave that can go through the entire Earth without being attenuated. In other words, it doesn't lose any energy to any surrounding system. And yet when it hits a human head or a body, it does interact and the signal is absorbed. This soliton is picked up. And it's taken 7 years of research, particularly by the Navy, to find out that this hydrogen bond here is sensitive to frequency. And there are certain very critical frequencies, like 7.82 is a good frequency. It actually reinforces the integrity of DNA.
And they make a deal that the Mossad lets me go, releases me. And in 1972, straight to Palo Alto, California, to Stanford Research Institute. And that's where Dr. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ and Edgar Mitchell and all those scientists who had very direct links to the CIA, they set up the experiments with me. So that was the beginning.
This film describes a 5-week investigation conducted at Stanford Research Institute with Uri Geller, a young Israeli. The film portrays a...
You have so many here, Andre. Which one is
Oh, these are for you. These are... Chew them well when you ingest. Lower your head a little bit. A little more. Now.
Oh, I see it. Now I see it.
All right, same way. Start with your left hand and try to find the one in this row. Well, there were a number of things that I was involved in all that craziness. But the first thing was our military, we did a lot of briefings at the Pentagon, couldn't believe that this simple scheme would do what the Russians are doing. So they had to put up a lot of money and duplicate it first. Then they found out, yeah, the Russians are doing it, Tesla was right, etc., etc. Once they got them going, then they want to know how this little toy works, right? You have to see if you can knock out installations in the Soviet Union, whether they're having their people go nuts or some people are going here, whether disease occurs. So they built one that was at Alice Springs, Australia, a big secret Australian research. So that, then they had to have another one, so they put up another one in South Africa, which is one of the reasons we have friendly relations with South Africa, in case you're interested, because they tolerate our presence there, because from a base in South Africa you can hit a certain part of the Soviet Union that's of great interest to them. And now we got another one going up in Antarctica. So anyways, the damn thing escalates.
And now we got another one going up in Antarctica.
What? I mean, is there anything else going on down there? I mean, we just went through a lot of stuff here.
Yes, actually. There's a system known as ELF, extra low frequency. It's also a massive antenna that's embedded in the ice there. When I arrived to the facility as a tradesman and firefighter, I was read into how everything worked because I needed for the safety of my crew to be able to battle fires and engage things appropriately. And at the onset, I was told that the ELF system is off. It's defunct, it's disabled, it is just sitting dead in the ice. But through my need to make an additional repair on something else and tracing back to a sub-panel, I was finding the circuit that I needed to lock out, tag out, and do all the safe repairs. But then I noticed that this other breaker that was supposed to be off was in the on position, and it was listed as the ELF. And I ran it up my chain. I said, what's going on here? I said, this is supposed to be off. I was told it's off now. And I was just given a hard, it's on. And that was the end of my need to know. They didn't want to tell me anything else. You have identified the circuit that you need to work on. You have been informed that you can safely do your job. Carry on. So I did my job. I made the repair that I needed to on the circuit next to the circuit that I was now informed is duly on and operating. So the ELF is up and running, and that, again, is a multifaceted directed energy weapons platform.
There's also something called DNA, which we can just show as a kind of a double spiral like this. There are two threads of material that go parallel to each other, and that these two threads are held together, and I'll make a little picture here, by a hydrogen bond. And actually the bond looks like this. It's carbon, 2 dots, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen. This is the bond. One carbon is in one DNA molecule, the nitrogen is in the other one, and there's this oxygen and this hydrogen. And this is the target of all the ELF signals. Now, listen to this paradox. And this is what drove all the scientists nuts in 1976 when the Russians first came on the air with the ELF signals being sent out from Russia. What drove them crazy was, here's a wave that can go through the entire Earth without being attenuated. In other words, it doesn't lose any energy to any surrounding system. And yet when it hits a human head or a body, it does interact and the signal is absorbed. This soliton is picked up. And it's taken 7 years of research, particularly by the Navy, to find out that this hydrogen bond here is sensitive to frequency. And there are certain very critical frequencies, like 7.82 is a good frequency. It actually reinforces the integrity of DNA. But the mystery was, why there's a radio signal coming, magnetic, ELF magnetic field, it stands for extremely low frequency. Why will it be stopped by a body, a plant, a paramecium, anything? It's because the DNA in every cell in every living creature is like a radio receiver for these magnetic waves. And we've now found out that, and I mentioned this in the cancer lecture, that if you beam at a human being or an animal where all the experiments are done, a signal of 3.21 hertz for 2 days in connection with certain chemicals in the body called protein kinases, the net result is cancer. It's that quick. If I beam an individual, and I can do this, and I've done it on myself, I've done it on others, with 6.66 hertz, and it has to be out to 2 decimal points, I affect your DNA in your brain so it puts out neuropeptides, which are called cholinergic group of, and you get depressed, and you can get very depressed. Fact is, I have found a frequency, which I've never revealed to anybody, which is somewhere in here where I can kill creatures.
Oh, look at that. This square area here, this is the lower meadow.
That's clearly artificial. That looks like a phased array.
Sure does.
Looks like a phased array antenna system built under the ground. You see where I'm going with this, Eric?
Mm-hmm.
We've heard rumors that certain low frequencies in that range could be used to not only detect UAPs, but possibly even take them down. But I never knew them to bury them. They were always on the surface.
Like a low frequency beam or something?
Well, just phased array radar. The rumors that is actually radar that brought down the Roswell thing, assuming it was real. You know, I don't have any evidence one way or the other, but my point is that's just another one of the stories we've heard that kind of fits in the why Bigelow would have been interested.
Right.
But if Bigelow would have found that, he would have stayed.
That's what I thought too.
Unless.
But there are those who believe that this same technology could also be used by DARPA as a new form of mind control. Like their counterparts at the CIA, DARPA-funded researchers have spent decades investigating how the human mind can be altered. In 1965, DARPA launched Project Pandora, which studied the possibility of using microwave radiation to control human behavior. The project reportedly ended in 1969, but DARPA's investigation of how machines can affect and possibly control the brain continues to this day.
So what's the next step? Maybe the next step is we can send instructions and information to an actual person from a distance with this kind of technology to let another person control their actions. But that could be something that could be malicious.
If there's some way to do it from a distance, a much greater distance than something that you can wear on your scalp, that would be the ultimate technological achievement that would fall into this realm of mind control and direct human-machine interface that DARPA may well want to keep secret.
Or could it be manipulated purposely by people who have the technology to simulate UFO sightings? And people say, well, of course not. Who would do a thing like that? Well, I would remind you that during the Watergate investigation, it was discovered that there was a plan originated in the White House to surface a submarine off the coast of Cuba and paint the second coming of Christ over the island of Cuba using holograms. Which is well within our technology today. The idea was that since there is a large Catholic population in Cuba, they would be so upset by this vision that this would saturate the communication channels, you know, the telephone system in Cuba, long enough for an invasion to take place.
How interesting. I never heard of that.
Well, I think that's you know, a classic in psychological warfare, but that kind of manipulation is well understood, and I have personally investigated several apparently genuine UFO cases where there was in fact a manipulation. My conclusion, the conclusion of scientists working with me, was that there was in fact a manipulation taking place, and that it was not a hoax on the part of the witnesses, but a hoax on the part of somebody much better organized.
Another one we put on a UFO and was able to report like he had been abducted. You know, this is a case where he had not been, but UFO sightings were, popular at the time, particularly abduction scenario. So that was one where, again, changing history could cause a new scenario and be able to describe the situation just as if it were real.
Was that an experiment, or was there a practical use for that?
No, that was, I hate to say experiment. A lot of this was, I mean, it wasn't consciously what we set up to do. It was more serendipitous. Here's the events. Who are we working with? What can we do? Who wants to, we were literally making it up as we went along.